Okay, so I got lots of glue drying, so in between waiting for things to set up, I'm gonna work a bit on the canopy mount. So, canopy fits pretty clean. There's a fair bit of flange left over on the inside. How I'm gonna mount this, or how I plan to mount it, is I'm gonna put an arrow shaft, trusty dandy arrow shaft, in the front for a pin. So like that. And then I'm going to use this style of release latch in the back. So this is a spring-loaded piano wire here with just a tapered bolt on it. Now, these are pretty typical in a lot of the Japanese planes that you see. I've never used this particular style before, so I figured I'd give it a try. If you want to use buttons like this, that's good too. These basically have a pin through them and you just push on the side. I've used these lots, never had an issue. Or if you want to use bolts or pin latches or whatever, there's lots of different methods of doing this that'll work fine. But for this video, these videos, I'm going to use this spring-loaded latch. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim back some of the flanges around here. Mainly just for access. Obviously, if you're flying electric, you got to be able to shove this battery. This is a 5,000 milliamp battery. There's not tons of room, in there for the fuselage. Like in this case, you wouldn't even be able to get your hand past the flange. And this is a 6,000 milliamp Thunder Power. So same thing, and it's even longer. So the hole that kind of comes with the kit is definitely too small. So I'm gonna go carve that out. I'll carve it out all the way around here and back, and I'm gonna carve out the piece in here that I want to cut out. I'm gonna leave a piece in the corner here for support, and I also need something to mount these two. This guy's gonna sit in here, something like that. So I'm gonna roughly figure out kind of where I want that. I might leave a little extra material. It's always easier to take some off. On the canopy, same thing. I'm gonna carve out a bunch of the flange. This center section here, it's carbon fiber, so it's been left carbon fiber for a reason, and that's to provide some lateral support. So although I'm going to narrow it down a bit, I am going to leave this piece across here, but I will hack out quite a bit. Now at the back here, where these are going to go, this bolt's going to sit up in top here, so there needs to be a piece of wood inside there to support that. So I'm going to leave this untouched. So I'll probably carve out the back up here. I'll leave a bit of this untouched, and then I'll carve out the rest. And in the front, I'll carve that out pretty deep. That carbon rod can sit in there, and we can just make a little recess and fiberglass over that to support it. So not a big deal. Okay, so I have all my lines marked off here, and also in the canopy. So that's basically where I'm going to cut around. I'm going to leave a bit more material around here where the pin's probably going to go. I'm going to leave some back here where these wood blocks are going to go to support the bolts. And I've marked around here, that's where the T-canalizer pins are going to pop through the top of the T-can former. I'll probably just cut it to that. So I've done all that work. So what I've done on here is I've marked off essentially where this radius starts. That's this back line. And then I've marked off the width of this piece forward of that. So essentially that's that width there. Right? That space is that space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount these, if you can imagine, sort of like this. So this is going to be left in place, this is going to get mounted onto it, and then there'll be a vertical form underneath here where this bottom piece screws to. And then I've made the flange 10 millimeters here, and I'm going to mount these inside that 10 millimeters. And then, so then inside the canopy, this is going to sit, if you can imagine, it's going to kind of sit like so inside the canopy. So the back of this will be right on that where that radius starts, right? So that's kind of how it's going to sit, just up against that flange like that. And so then when we put the bolt in, there's going to be a block of wood underneath here for that bolt location. So that's why I've made this cut out like this. I've left this material in here, and then I can position that block, and then I'll come back and trim it to fit that block afterwards, but I want to leave as much material as I can work with here. So I'm going to go ahead, cut all this out using my Dremel tool and the diamond bit cutter. Okay, so I've got all this trimmed up nicely now, and cleaned up, and the inside piece here. So yeah, lots of material taken out, so it's nice and open in here now. And then canopy, same thing. You know, I've trimmed up the front, left a little bit of material there for the time being. Narrowed this piece up and trimmed out the back and opened it up for where the pins are going to be. And I've left these in here now just for the time being, so we'll clean those up afterwards. So quite a bit more material or space. I don't know how much weight it takes off. I didn't bother to weigh it. So the next thing is to work on getting these guys in there. So really, I think this is going to have to go below, just because if it does sit on top, then this you know, remover pin here is not going to be on the, you know, in the fuse. So these are going to have to sit below. So I may end up taking all this material out of here anyways, but I'm gonna do that afterwards. So to do this, I'm gonna put kind of an L-shaped bit of wood across the fuselage here. So I'm gonna go ahead and cut that out, sort of make that L shape that's gonna fit inside here. Just at a 1/4 inch light ply, and then just trowel fit it in there and start working on getting these things mounted to that, and sort of where I need to cut the slots for these pieces of wire that are going to stick through the side of the fuselage. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that. Okay, so I've shaped this up and glued it together, and I took the springs out of these things just so I could mount them on the piece, and then, you know, test fit it into the fuselage without it being in the way. So that's kind of what that looks like. You know, these are sort of rounded a bit to get into the fuse, and then, you know, that's not an exact 90-degree angle. You know, so this takes a bit of fiddling around, but you see you get the idea of the end result of what I was going for. So next thing is I gotta trowel fit this in here, and I need to figure out where I'm gonna cut the slots for these springs, because these are gonna sit, you know, these are gonna sit inside the nylon pieces, and then they're gonna come outside the fuse somewhere. So I need to kind of locate those. So so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually clamp this in place with a spacer underneath here, and then use my calipers, figure out where that slot is. So in these, hard to see, there's a slot, you know, right there. So I'm going to use my calipers to kind of go down from the flange and figure out where that slot is. Okay, so I've clamped this in place. So it's a little bit tricky, but I put in some 1/4 inch spacers on each side, and, you know, a bit of wood here just to support it across the top. And I actually put in a piece in behind here, this big block down here at the bottom, which pushes up on the horizontal part of my little rail there. So that just sort of gets it in the fuse in position and holds it in place. So what I'm going to do now is there's those 2 little slots that I was talking about before. They're in here. So what I've done is I've used my caliper, the depth feature, and I basically set the flange on the base of the caliper, and then ran this down to the center of the slot. Right, so then I know essentially how deep to make that slot from the flange. So then I can mark that same depth on the outside of the fuselage. And then for where to cut it, I've really just marked in the top sort of the fore and aft position of that hole, that slot, right? So you just take that and mark that up on the flange, kind of roughly where that is. Now this is going to sit at an angle in here. You know, it doesn't sit exactly perfectly, but at least if we get close to the spot, we can always make it a little bit longer. So I'm going to go ahead now, use this depth, mark this off, transcribe these lines onto the tape here, and just grind a little groove in the side of the fuselage where those are going to be. Okay, so I've ground that slot in. I've repositioned it back, and you know, that actually worked out pretty good. So basically this slides forward on there, and it gives me enough travel that I should be able to get the bolt in there. You know, now you may have to adjust it a little bit, but it's really easy to adjust. I just use one of these little diamond carving bits on my Dremel, one of these guys. So that's pretty, you know, it's pretty easy to go back in there and grind it out. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get both these back in place, double check both of them, and then I'm going to tack glue with some CA this rail into position. I'm thinking before I do that I might lighten it just a little bit, just take a moon shaped piece out of the middle, but basically I'm going to do that, and then if you want to drill some holes in to lighten it up, whatever the case is, but I'm going to do that and then tack glue that in position, and then I'm going to start working on the canopy portion. Okay, so I've repositioned this back into place. I did cut out a chunk of light ply out of there just to make it a bit lighter. I got both springs in each side, everything fits up. You know, now there's a bit of adjustment I can make to this, you know, up and down. You know, just double check that everything's kind of making sense to you. And we can always pull these back out and adjust those holes slightly if you need to. It's not that critical. If they're not fitting exactly right, or you're not super happy with them, we can always tweak them a bit. No big deal. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in some medium CA just on each side here on the wood, just to bond it to the fuse. Now again, you know, hopefully you roughen that up before we got to this point. Always, when you're gluing anything to the fuse, always roughen it up. So I'm going to go and put some CA in there and just tack glue this in place for the time being, and then we can continue working on the canopy part of it. Alright, so I've taken the spacers out. I cleaned these up a little bit, just open them up just so we can get the little bolts in there. Everything worked out pretty good. These nice. So we can still take these out afterwards and do any adjustment we need to. So the next thing will be to figure out where we're going to drill the holes in the canopy. So the canopy is going to go on here. Obviously these little bolts need to go up into the canopy somewhere. So I'm going to put those on there. And when you put them in there, they sort of wedge back because of the force of that spring. So I'm going to hold them straight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark off on each side essentially where the center of that bolt is, and measure from the edge of the fuselage over to the center of that bolt as well. So in this case it's about 13 millimeters. So I do that for both sides, and then I'm going to mark those positions on the canopy, and I'm going to drill a hole up through the canopy just so we get those located properly, and then test fit that they match up with where the bolts actually go. Okay, so I've drilled these out basically to where I measured them, and I've just test fit those bolts. Obviously there's no backing block inside here, so these are just pretty wobbly. But really at this point I'm gonna trial fit that these kind of will go in there on both sides, which they do, and they hold in actually pretty solid there. So those fit in there nice. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a backing block in on each one of those, and I'm first going to drill the hole in the block and then line it up with the hole that I just drilled in the canopy, because I know that one's pretty close, and then I'm going to thread those bolts in there. Okay, so I fashioned up the block. It's just two layers of 1/4 inch light ply. I drilled a hole through there that's slightly smaller than this one, just so the bolt is something to thread into. And then I just lined it up with that hole and glued it in place with some CA. And so then that's what it looks like when I thread the bolt in there. So I just threaded that bolt in there just with a driver. You know, I'm going to come back and do a lot of extra filler around here, but I'm just doing this to get the location proper and just to get the depth and everything sized up and checked up. So I'm going to go ahead and put this other bolt in, and then we'll start fitting it up. Okay, so I've got both bolts in there. Now I've test fit this to get them the right length, so that's the right length for them. Let's go ahead and test fit this on here. I've already test fit it, but basically I haven't done the front pin yet, and I'll do that later. You know, but it would go in, and then these would sink into their spots, and you can slide down each side, and they both drop in there, and they fit pretty nice. So there's the fit to the one, and there's the fit on the other. So they seem to work pretty good. I mean, I'll end up probably having a little bit of foam in there, so this may sit up just a little bit. I might have to readjust them, but they're pretty easy to adjust. So that's basically the rear canopy mount. So I'll start doing the front canopy mount, and really what I'm going to do there first is I'm going to drill a hole in there for my arrow shaft, because I like to use these nice big arrow shafts. So I'm going to drill a hole in the one side for the arrow shaft, and I'm going to mark up where that intersects, and then I'm basically going to drill a hole through the other piece and go in there and tack glue my arrow shaft in place, and that'll be the front retention shaft, and that will basically finish up the canopy mount. Okay, so the next part we're going to work on the canopy is this front pin. So we do have these are all nicely in here, you know, just to show you again. You know, drop those in place. There. So that canopy fits pretty good on there. I mean, Pascal's composite works always good. The seams are super tight. So what I do is I want this arrow shaft in the front of the canopy here, like imagine a hole through there. I don't maybe want it exactly parallel with this part, but maybe sticking down a little bit. And then that's going to protrude out, you know, and I'm going to have a mating hole in here, and I will back this up with like 1/4 inch light ply. I'll have a mating slot in here, you know, and then really we're just going to put that canopy in there, and then down at the back and into our pins. So that's how I'm going to set that up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get a hole roughly in the right spot in here where I want this arrow shaft to go, so that it goes in there, you know, not super tight. Like, we're going to glue this in with epoxy, so it's going to go in there and stick out, and then I can, you know, approximate where this hole is going to be here, and then really finally I'm going to back that up and really establish the fit with some light ply. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this hole in first, show you what that looks like, and then work on the fuselage. Okay, so I got my hole in my canopy. So again, the arrow shaft just kind of fits in like that. You know, this all angles and stuff we'll establish in a bit. I just want to get the holes lined up so that they're really, really close, and then I can glue it into here and fine tune that one. So I did draw the hole here. So what I did is I measured down from basically the edge of the fuselage to the top of this hole, so it's 5 millimeters, or the edge of the canopy, and made the same distance there, and then used the circle guide to draw my hole. And really the canopy mold line, you know, it's pretty close to center. You can double check that. Like, that's, you know, those two are pretty even when that canopy's, you know, centered up. So again, you know, there will be an opportunity to kind of adjust this fit. So right now, mainly just to get it in the approximate spot, and then we can get the carbon rod in there and sort of tack glue everything in place, and then fine tune this up. Okay, so I got that hole in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically put the canopy back on. I'm going to see how close I got these two holes. I'm just going to set that in there. Drop this canopy in place with the latches. Yeah, you'll notice that the canopy's not exactly right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to file that out on the canopy side just to get that exactly lined up so that my dowel goes in there. Okay, so now I got it so that my dowel my carbon tube coming from the front of the fuse kind of slides up in there neatly, right? So that actually fits in there. You know, those holes, you know, this got filed out a little bit, kind of off to the side like so. You know, so now I kind of know where that dowel needs to fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this dowel off, I'm going to leave some extension in here, and I'm going to tack glue this thing into place, and then, you know, just make sure this fits pretty close. Okay, so kind of getting ready. I put a little 1/8 inch balsa support underneath here, and that's just to give this a bit of support so you get the right angle, otherwise you could have it potentially really, really steep or something kind of funny like that. So I'm trying to keep that roughly as parallel to this angle as I can get it. So I'm going to leave about 1/4 inch overlap here because I'm going to put some plywood in behind there to support the pin. So I'm going to leave a little bit overhang so that that's about the right penetration once that gets in there. So I'm just going to CA this in place for now, just to hold it here so we can do the test fit. So I got that glued in and just test fitted up. You'll notice that it's not exactly, it's a bit of a ridge there, so I got to adjust it that way slightly. So I'll just use my file on the hole in the fuselage to slide it that way. And it also is a bit tight on the top, so when you put it in, you'll notice, oh, maybe it's got a bit of resistance to moving. Like in this case, it actually kind of doesn't want to go down. It kind of wants to sit more like up like that. So you may need to just file that over slightly. Just go very slow and gentle, and you'll get the right spot. I've got that fit pretty good. You'll notice there's a bit of slop in here. Like I can shift that canopy, you know, left and right a bit. So that side is the more accurate position. And this is why I don't put that 1/4 inch former in there, is because now when I slide that former up over that pin, you know, I can get that tack glued in the exact right spot. And then every time I put that canopy back on, it's in the right place. You know, make sure that canopy comes on and off really easy. So in this case, you know, I pull these pins forward, up it goes. You know, when I drop it in here, slide that in, you know, those pins are in the right spot. I just pull these forward and it basically drops it on, so let them back. So you want to make sure that thing, you know, goes in and out quite easily, regardless of whether you're using a latch, front or back, you know, pins, buttons, whatever the case may be. Just take your time and test fit that a little bit. So I'm going to go make that former now, and then we'll tack glue that into place. Okay, so I made my little former, and this piece is just going to sit up underneath in there, right? And so it's really just doubling up here, so you get lots of bearing support on that pin. So now, in order to do this, I'm going to put this canopy back on, and really I'm going to take this former and I'm going to slide it in here. And this is why you do this before you put the motor in. And it's going to go over top of that pin, and I'm just going to position that, make sure it's in the right spot, tape that down, and I'm going to CA that former in place. And that'll sort of lock that canopy in position. Okay, that's what that former looks like, kind of inside the nose. Got a couple clamps to hold on there, just some CA. You can see that pin is just about flush with that former, so measured it pretty close. And then just on the front of the fuselage, you know, there's our fit. So it's pretty good. You know, I'll put some probably anti-vibration foam in here anyway, so we likely have to do a bit of adjustment on that fit, but you know, that canopy fits pretty close. This side sticks out a little bit. It's even at the front and even at the back, so it's probably maybe compressed a little bit from that spring, but I don't get too worried about that. This side's actually really good. So pretty happy with that, and we'll just let that cure up and do that former down the road, do the final work on that when we do all the other fillets. Okay, so we're getting down to the last few items on this plane. One thing I have not tackled yet is this top piece here that goes on top. So need to kind of mark off this airfoil shape so we can start fitting this on top. So how do you do that? Well, what I'm doing is I basically took the foam core, you know, and that's the piece that sort of fits on top of the model in that space. So I cut it out of the foam core, and then I use that essentially to just sort of trace out the airfoil shape. Now, you know, it's not going to be perfect, so I'm going to cut, you know, give myself a wide berth on that line to start with, and then I'm going to slowly fit that up and see how that's fitting and make adjustments as it gets down. Once I get it close, I can kind of trace the airfoil onto it and should be able to get a pretty accurate cut out of it. So I'm going to go ahead and start trimming this up and do some test fits. So sort of the first cut, so you can kind of see, you know, we've now got it. It actually isn't a bad fit right off the bat. That airfoil shape's pretty close. But at the back, you know, we need to get that down quite a bit more. So this is definitely gonna have to come up higher. And with our canopy, you know, this piece actually going to fit over top, so we do have to start cutting out for the shape of that shape of this front former. So I am going to kind of figure that front former shape out, and you know, that's going to have to sit right up to the canopy flush, and then this is going to fill a bit of the gap down here. So I got to start taking this inside piece out in order to make that fit. Okay, now that you kind of got that airfoil shape roughed out, and I did rough out the inside, I took these down fairly narrow on each side. We're going to set this on top. We take the T-can off, set this on top. Actually, before you do that, you need to mark where the top of the airfoil is, both sides, and on the front here too. Maybe a little bit hard to see. So there's a mark there, and I marked it on there. So just mark those off everywhere, because we're going to use those. Then what we're going to do is we're going to position this kind of down in place, and we're going to use those to mark that same position on here. That way we know how far up we got to cut that airfoil on the on this top cap piece. And the same thing you're going to do from the front here up on here. Now remember, there's a bit of a gap to the airfoil, so I'm not going to cut all the way out here. I'm going to leave this kind of in place because that's going to fill a bit of that gap. You can always trim it off afterwards. You can't really add, it's much harder to add it back on. So keep fitting that up. Always make sure to keep checking with the canopy that this is lined up at the top of the canopy as well when you're doing that. Okay, so I drew my next mark on there, and I did trim it down close. Again, I left myself some space. So I just want to keep double checking that this is going to fit up nice. So it's coming in the front here, it's getting pretty close. And so the airfoil is actually fitting up, you know, that line's fitting up pretty good on both sides. Both sides actually fit up pretty good. So the same thing here. So see, I'm going to keep bringing that up in the front here. You know, I'm going to keep bringing this up, you know, and this is going to slowly drop in kind of place and fill in that gap that we have there, right? And then when it's attached to the T-canalizer, it's just gonna, you know, blend in with the fuselage there. You won't even know it. So I think for the most part, you know, this is fairly close. So I'm just gonna keep removing material off here, very, very gently, a little bit at a time, until I get this pretty much lined up. Now, you know, this is almost there. But it's not exactly perfect. Okay, so that's pretty much it. You know, number of trials, back and forth, back and forth. But we're basically the right size. So this now, you know, is going to get painted, and this is going to get covered. So, you know, I think my scheme is mostly white through the middle here, so this will likely just remain white. But you know, I'm not going to attach this to the T-can, you know, until after all the painting and clear coating's done. And really, I'm probably gonna have some foam in here, so I may have to do a little bit more adjustment to it. But at least now we know if we just need to take off a little bit, where we got to take it off. You'll see the front, how it sort of recesses in there. You know, that takes a little bit of work, and it mates up nice with the canopy. So any additional adjustment I'll do, you know, now kind of at the end of the build. So last thing to do will be the location of that screw. Super easy trick for doing that. So the trick involves the laser, and we're really just going to set the we just set the fuse on the side, and we put the laser, center of the laser, so it intersects the center of that bolt hole. So make sure your canopy's on, your plane's relatively stable. You know, because this is leveling, it should protrude on here. If this was a really far distance away, then I might be a bit concerned how accurate it'll be, but for the distance it is, it's going to be pretty much bang on. So very carefully put this in place. We don't want to put a lot of pressure on it. We just want to get it, and we're going to mark off where that hole is. So that should be exactly where that bolt's going to come through. Now I'm not going to drill a real big one, I'm just going to drill a very small one. Because mostly I don't want to take this bolt out ever. I want it in there, and I want almost no hole protruding through. You know, the bolt really can't come out of there with that rubber band, and I don't think there's enough room in here anyways, and it shouldn't ever need to be replaced. So, okay, so I just loosely taped that piece to the top of the T-can. You see the bolt hole in the top there, nicely centered. I did have to slightly adjust it, but it's so close. There's what the front looks like. See, it's got a bit, it's extended past the front, but it matches up with the canopy, which is the idea. And that's the back, you know, it's just hollow. Probably leave that hollow. That's the bolt sitting inside there, so it can't really go anywhere. You know, so test fit it up to the fuse, make sure you're happy with how that worked out. So like I say, after we get that in with the foam and everything and all covered up, we'll do the final test fit of it and adjust it as necessary, and then probably use something like a RC56 or a Canopy glue just to attach it to the covering, and that'll be all I do with it.